And I hand it over to Dr. Karan.
Thank you, Chandrani. Okay, so I am filling in for Professor Mitra. And we take this dialogue in a way forward. Like we looked at analysis, and now we are starting to look at the implications of regional integration as well as the alternatives available, the kind of architecture that will emerge. And the first speaker in the afternoon is Professor John Ravenhill, and he is at the School of International Affairs in Waterloo, Canada, and Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo. Earlier, he was head of the School of Politics and International Relations at ANU, where he also co-directed the ANU's MacArthur Foundation's Asia Security Initiative project. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia and of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. He's written a lot in journals, international organization, World Politics, Review of International Political Economy, and his most recent books are the Oxford Handbook for International Relations and the 4th edition of the Global Political Economy. His PhD is from the University of California at Berkeley. We are honored to have you here, Professor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, for those very generous remarks. It's a great pleasure to be back at the Institute. I feel like I should be paying you handsomely for the privilege of being here. It was -20 when I left. It wasn't good. It's definitely something to be said for being in Singapore in February. I'm delighted to have this invitation to this very important workshop. As will become obvious, I am not an expert on South Asia. I am already learning a lot from the workshop, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more. But the paper and presentation that I have prepared, I think will introduce a number of issues that will be discussed in greater depth in later sessions in the next day and a half or so. And what I want to try to do is to provide a brief overview of the history of the contested concept of regionalism in this part of the world. Look briefly at two significant recent developments, the emergence of two meta-regional agreements, the TPP and RCEP, and then consider how they might relate to APEC and to one another in the future, and conclude with some brief consideration of how these possible developments in regional economic cooperation may constrain the options available to India. The starting point here, is, of course, is the point that's often made that regions are social constructions. There's nothing natural about a region, area of intergovernmental collaboration. And in many instances, in entering into regional cooperation, governments are motivated as much by political strategic considerations as by economic concerns. There's a lively ongoing academic debate about the relative importance of these factors, about how important domestic business interests are in pushing for regional agreements. But I think everyone would agree that, at least in part, and I think in this region in particular, security, political considerations have played an important role in shaping regional cooperation. I'm not going to detail the history of cooperation in the region in this presentation. I go into it in some detail in the paper. But I think the bottom line that I want to take out of this history is that throughout the last 2 decades in this region, probably more so than in any other part of the world, the whole idea of what is the relevant region for cooperation has been contested, and the ongoing contest has been between Asia-Pacific and East Asian definitions, now broadened to East Asia, Oceania, and India. And at the same time, there's been an ongoing contest between which country or group of countries is going to be the main driver of the process of regional economic cooperation. Will it be ASEAN on the one side or the United States on the other? And when one's talking about ASEAN being in the driver's seat, well, to what extent is it in fact ASEAN, or are the key initiatives coming from some of the bigger players within the region? Now, into this mix, we have the recently negotiated TPP that will be signed, it seems for certain, in Auckland in a couple of weeks' time. The TPP, I'd suggest, is arguably a game changer for regional economic cooperation. Potentially a game changer because we don't know at this point in time whether or not it will actually be ratified. Debbie's paper lays out the details of a fairly complicated process. And ultimately, of course, it comes back to the United States, whether the thing will actually come into existence. And the risk here, of course, is that the TPP becomes a political football in a presidential election year. Hillary Clinton has already said that she does not support the TPP, but which Hillary Clinton this is, speaking on that day, is a little unclear. Mark Shields, I'm not sure whether you ever see the PBS NewsHour in Singapore. One of the commentators on there, who's generally sympathetic to people coming from a democratic perspective, said that he went to a meeting with Hillary Clinton a few weeks ago, and she was almost authentic in her comments. So is she just opposing TPP because of concerns about being outflanked on the left, Bernie Sanders, or is this a genuine change of heart on her part? On the Republican side, well, the front runner in Iowa, Ted Cruz, opposes the agreement. According to the Des Moines Register, the local newspaper, while Cruz said he supports free trade, he believes the Trans-Pacific Partnership would undermine U.S. immigration laws and undermine the nation's sovereignty. So that's the sort of argument that's coming from the far right of the Republican Party. So we're not sure then what sort of support the agreement is going to get from the intending presidential candidates. Let's assume that the TPP goes ahead. What does it do? Well, first off, it really does confirm the Asia-Pacific as the key region for the future of regional economic cooperation. But this is a very narrow definition of the region, returning us almost to the APEC pre the accession of the Three Chinas definition of the region. Secondly, the TPP undermines ASEAN's centrality in the process of regional economic cooperation. The TPP, of course, splits ASEAN down the middle, with the majority of ASEAN countries not being invited to the table. And the TPP is strategic from the US perspective in three senses, I'd argue. It's strategic in reinforcing military alliances. I think there's a bit of attempt to write revisionist history going on very often in discussing the US attitude towards the TPP, an attempt to write out the notion that it was, in fact, designed to contain China and is an essential part of the US pivot to Asia. And the paper includes what I see as a wonderful quote from Ashton Carter, the Secretary of Defense, where he says, quote, "Passing the TPP is as important to me as another aircraft carrier. It would deepen our alliances and partnerships abroad and underscore our lasting commitment to the Asia Pacific. So it's strategic in that sense then, in terms of military alliances. It's strategic in the sense of who gets to set the rules of the game, and it's strategic too in the sense of what the content of the rules are going to be. RCEP, on the other hand, okay, that's the security considerations. RCEP, on the other hand, political considerations generally less important, I suggest. Of course, RCEP was a response to the US TPP initiative. It defines the region as Asia, broadly defined, including, of course, Oceania, and it reaffirms ASEAN's centrality in the process of regional integration. So the guiding principles and objectives for negotiating the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, agreed by the RCEP parties at the start of the talks, asserted that, quote, negotiations for the RCEP will recognize ASEAN's centrality in the emerging regional economic architecture. Turning from the strategic and political to the economic side of things, the TPP, of course, was intended to be the first of the 21st century trade agreements where focus would be on facilitating the management of supply chains, to address behind-the-border issues and, of course, regulatory issues among the most significant of these. So the areas covered include rules of origin, intellectual property rights, investor-state dispute settlement, government procurement, competition policies, labour and the environment, although that received fairly short shrift in the final agreements. And then there was a question of whether the TPP would serve to bring together the vast number of bilateral agreements that have sprung up in this region over the last decade and a half or so. It was this idea that the TPP could promote multilateralization that excited the WTO at one point, which we saw the TPP as really being a solution to the noodle bowl problem. Well, what are the results been? Definitely no multilateralization. The United States made it very clear from the beginning that it would only negotiate new agreements with parties with which it didn't previously had bilateral agreements, and that the other countries with which it had bilateral agreements, and these would be the basis for the TPP negotiations. And so, in the TPP, you had a very strange hybrid set of negotiations. Some were bilateral, some were plurilateral. And this was problematic when communication was not too good across the different levels of the negotiations. So the classic example of this was the bilateral agreement that the United States struck with Japan on car parts, which was only communicated to Canada and Mexico at a very late stage of the negotiations, and all hell broke loose at that point. For me, perhaps the single most important part of the TPP agreement was the establishment of a single set of rules of origin, and also to allow accumulation across partners. And this is one area in which there was a move towards treating the region as a whole rather than a set of individual agreements. But on regulatory harmonization, for instance, there's very little progress, and one of the reasons for this, of course, is because it comes back to a question of distribution. Whose rules apply? And President Obama was very clear on this. We don't like the rules, China will write the rules. So it's not just a demand for a single set of rules, but for the United States rules to apply. And this is shown most crassly, I think, by the USTR's website, where, as you can see, the TPP is being sold as made in America. Rules, of course, have distributive consequences. Whose rules apply matters in terms of who gets what from the agreement. And a lot of the negotiations became bogged down in what were decidedly 20th century issues rather than 21st century issues, in particular conflicts over the distribution of rents. Agriculture, not surprisingly, getting access to the Japanese market or Canadian dairy market. Perhaps more surprisingly was conflict over textiles and over auto parts, because here you had well-developed supply chains, but essentially you had competition between two different geographical bases for organization of the supply chain. On the one hand, the Americas, and on the other, East Asia versus the Asia-Pacific basis. Now, for me, the outcomes in the TPP are limited, and Debbie and I have already started arguing about this, and maybe we can open this whole question up in the discussion period. I think the outcomes in some areas are surprisingly limited, very minor concessions, extended periods of phase-in, and then in issues such as the treatment of biologics, the data protection, deliberate ambiguity in the treaty about how these are going to be handled. The result that the countries that oppose the extension of a period of protection for data, Australia, Chile, were able to claim that nothing in the TPP would change their policies, require change in policies. Now, talking about RCEP and its economic outcomes, well, and this is entirely, of course, guesswork this time. We just don't know what the outcomes are going to be. But to date, the negotiations and the principles on which RCEP is being negotiated have given rise to low expectations. And what is very clear again is that we're going to have a series of agreements that will differ by country rather than some unified regional treaty. Finally, how will all of these things fit together? And in speculating on this issue, I borrowed from a framework that Vinny Agarwal developed and is built on institutional design. Essentially, you have a limited number of alternatives. You could have a new overarching agreement put into place, under which both the TPP and RCEP would be subsumed. You might have a situation where the three institutions exist in parallel, RCEP doing one thing, APEC doing another, TPP doing something else. Or you could possibly have a hierarchical relationship where, say, countries would begin in RCEP and then graduate to the TPP at some point in the future. One way in which these institutions might be reconciled is through the Free Trade Agreement of Asia Pacific, which of course has been a long-standing APEC aspiration. But for many people, despite valiant efforts of PEC to keep the concept alive over the years, it was really quite surprising to see it resurrected at the 2014 Beijing APEC meeting. I mean, for me, this was a brilliant diplomatic move by the Chinese government, because it was able to portray Washington in a very bad light by saying, you're putting forward this divisive TPP, we're supporting a much broader region-wide agreement which is consistent with APEC and consistent with what you and the APEC eminent persons group have argued for years. So it was a brilliant diplomatic move. The outcome of the 2014 Beijing APEC meeting was this agreement that there would be a roadmap developed for the FTAAP, and that both the TPP and RCEP were identified as possible pathways to realize the FTAAP. I am skeptical about how this could be put into being, however, because I come back to the argument that the TPP, the RCEP, they are both exclusionary, they are both designed around political considerations. There's considerable overlap in coverage, so you couldn't see a parallel set of organizations. You're not going to get into the TPP unless you're willing to go way beyond what RCEP is willing to do, and so therefore if the TPP is going to be a pathway, well, you sign up for its rules. And so the question is, well, if other countries join TPP, and of course Korea, Thailand have already indicated that they want to sign on, then what will become of RCEP? Will it just be reduced to a rump, rather like EFTA was in Europe? Much will depend here, I think, on not just whether RCEP goes beyond the existing ASEAN +1 agreements, but whether as RCEP goes beyond the existing bilateral agreements that China and India have with other players in the region. As the ambassador said this morning, India already has a large number of agreements, is signing more. Well, RCEP could be important to get access to the Chinese market and to the Indian market, but if you already have this for a bilateral agreement, where does RCEP's value lie? So where does that leave India's options? Now, we've already had discussion about APEC membership. I mean, to me, it's quite bizarre that India has not been admitted to APEC. Malcolm, in his paper, discusses some of the issues relating to APEC expansion, but to me it seems like a very low-hanging fruit. As the ambassador said, APEC is not a forum for trade negotiations. It's a trade facilitation organization in which you do things on a voluntary basis. It does seem that the Americans are punishing India for its approaches in other fora by essentially making it very, very difficult at the moment for India's membership to go forward. And from what we've seen in the public statements, they're splitting hairs by saying, well, yes, President Obama said we encourage India's interest in APEC. We don't actually encourage its membership. So, to me, India and APEC, it's a no-brainer. It should happen. I hope that it will. So, in RCEP, I think there's a question of, well, what leadership role can India play in RCEP? India is a huge economy. It's an important country strategically. Surely it should be providing leadership if it thinks that RCEP is a valuable institution. And then finally, the TPP. All of the studies that have been done of the TPP using CGE modeling, and there's a new one hot off the press from the World Bank a couple of weeks ago, indicates that the welfare gains to participants in the TPP will be relatively small. It's only if China comes into the TPP that you'll see significant increases to welfare rising from the TPP. Now, of course, there are all sorts of issues with CGE modeling. Some people argue that they don't capture potential gains sufficiently. It's also true that they don't capture some of the costs of the key provisions, most particularly those pertaining to intellectual property rights. And there are significant costs of the extension of IP protection, especially in pharmaceuticals, which countries with national healthcare systems, Australia, Canada, as well as developing economies, have every reason to be concerned about. Now, if the welfare gains for participants are small, the other side of the coin is that the estimated welfare losses for non-participants will also be very small. And this World Bank study suggests, for instance, that loss to India will be inconsequential. In fact, Indian exports will actually increase because of the TPP, even though it's not a member. So, bottom line is then, is the TPP very much a stretch too far, as the ambassador was suggesting? Is not being part of the TPP really going to be damaging to the Indian economy? And what are the potential costs as well as some benefits? And the obvious benefit, I would think, from being in the TPP is the potential for domestic economic restructuring that might be driven by it. But are the potential costs actually going to outweigh potential benefits? I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Working on trade and trade-related issues for over 20 years now. Since February 2012, we've been working as head of international trade policy at ICAI. And as the head of the international trade policy division, we exclusively grounded in industry members on all aspects of trade negotiation across the world. So very closely associated with the one thing we make discussions as well as policy formulations on India's engagement he is also actively working on the industry in several trade, Africa and East Asia. One major assignment to WTO trade and investment relations. He is also involved currently in a major project entitled Supporting Integrated Investment in Africa. These few months,
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's indeed a privilege to be here. In fact, after joining the industry chamber over 3 years ago, I get very few occasions to interact with such a very distinguished crowd who has learned and experienced. And so it's a great privilege for me, and thanks a lot to ISS. In particular, who invited me. Since morning, we have been discussing India's integration or access into Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Many issues have been highlighted, flagged, and it has been really a fascinating discussion so far. But from the industry perspective, I would not like to repeat what has already been said, but I would like to flag all those issues which are being debated in the government circle, by industry with the government, and more importantly, if you look at the current economic scenario in India, economic situation, there are two very critical issues. One, of course, export slowdown, and which is really is giving us a sleepless night, because In 2011-12, we set a target of reaching $500 billion of merchandise trade by 2014-15. That has passed. And this year, if we touch $300 billion, we will be extremely fortunate. So that's a major concern for Government of India and for industry as well. Second is that you all are aware that Make in India campaign, that's a kind of signature initiative of the Government of India, Prime Minister in particular. And Prime Minister himself has been selling India as an attractive investment destination through this campaign and encouraging foreign companies to come and invest in India. So from both perspectives, reviving export, which is slowing down, and attracting more foreign direct investment, our integration with Asia Pacific is extremely crucial. Let me first discuss a little bit about export slowdown. If you go back to the last 2-3 decades, how our exports, look at the India export pattern, export growth pattern. The GSP, which we were enjoying in European Union and USA and other developed markets, that has really helped us a lot in boosting our exports. Now we lost our GSP in the European Union, and though in America it has been revived, but still some of the major sectors are not part of that GSP. So that has really hit our export very hard. And other than that, of course, the slowdown in the major market, which have been our traditional market, European Union and America. At the same time, for the last many years, we have been practicing our own product diversification strategy and export and market diversification strategy. And the purpose was to diversify our exports to this Asia Pacific and East Asia region. And that has not resulted in a very beneficial or desired outcome to us. So for export revival, it is very important that all those free trade agreements which we have signed in this region, like Japan, Korea, ASEAN, and now currently the RCEP negotiations which are going on, that must result in better market access for Indian products in those regions. So that is one. Second is investment. As I said, that the success of Make in India and making India a manufacturing hub depends upon how much foreign direct investment we are able to attract, and that too from Asia Pacific region. Because some of the countries like USA, Canada, Russia, Japan, Korea, China, Singapore, they are potentially big investors, and they can really help India to make in India program very successful. So having said that, now let me come to the India's accession to Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. In fact, we are also part of Asia Society exercise. Ambassador Shyam Saran was mentioning this morning that he is the co-chair along with former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. And from industry side, we are engaged in that group, task force. And we are engaged with the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Commerce simultaneously that was in the run-up to the last year Asia Pacific Summit, which was held in Manila, and we were seriously trying to weigh our options, how we can accede to India Pacific Economic Cooperation, what would be pros and cons and implication for the government, implication for the industry as such. So whole continuously 3-4 months we debated quite extensively. But of course we did not come to any very concrete or specific conclusion that this is time for us to accede to India Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. But if you look at the 3 very critical elements, particularly from the point of view of our accession to Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, one, of course, geopolitical interest, that of course is heavily loaded in favor that we should go and accede to APEC. Second is trade and economic linkages. Many studies have been done, and which all of them prove that economically, from trade, from investment point of view, it is beneficial. But there is a caveat attached to it, because joining an agreement, joining a group is easier than making use of that grouping. As I said, that we have in the last 4 or 5 years, since 2009, we have negotiated, we have concluded, we have signed or personalized various free trade agreements. But somehow those agreements have not been able to translate into our desired purpose objective. For instance, when we signed FTA with Japan in 2009, with ASEAN in 2009 and Japan and Korea thereafter, Malaysia, we were hoping that we will encourage Japanese companies to set their production and manufacturing base here. We will be able to attract more foreign direct investment. But in order to attract foreign direct investment, we have to create enabling environment also. We have to address many concerns with the foreign investors, foreign companies have. And that we could not do in the last previous economic regime. And that has really impacted us very adversely. In trade and economic linkage, the second factor is how better our industry is prepared. And that is a big concern from the Indian industry point of view, that all these FTAs which have not resulted in much benefit to us. So our industry is also a little vulnerable and tentative in its support to greater engagement with the Asia Pacific region, because they have not been able to judge or see much benefit of whatever agreements have been signed in the recent past. And third, which is very critical from the strategic point of view, from the negotiating point of view, how it is going to impact both. It has been mentioned that Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation is not a negotiating forum, but joining a group, it has some repercussion on your own strategy, on own negotiating strategy in the climate change or trade agreement or any other international forum. So having said that, let me just turn to my presentation. I would not like to go through entire presentation because many issues have already been addressed. But if you look at the India's and APEC, it has been 20 years since India made its first request to, at that point, I already said it was in 1998. However, since when India's economic and diplomatic engagement with APEC countries has really gone better and bigger. Our Prime Minister Modi, last 1.5 years, visited 9 of the APEC countries with a major objective to boost economic ties. That was the central purpose of his visit. In PMO, there is separate Japan cell set up to fast-track investment from Japan. Japan has promised to invest for $35 billion in the coming years in India. So those kind of facilitation government of India is trying to do for the foreign investors. The economic ties with India and APEC countries have moved beyond trade to investment. APEC accounts for 35% of India's marketized trade. 1/3 of India's FDI inflow coming from major APEC economies that constitute Japan, Korea, Singapore, Australia, etc. 40% of the FDI outflows go to APEC countries. I mean, India also in the recent past has become an important global investor, and this region, of course, is an attractive destination for Indian companies also, because for Indian companies going to Europe and America, that's a cost-wise not very effective. This region and Africa, of course, both regions are quite attractive for Indian companies. So what we have seen in the last 1.5 decades, that there has been a robust institutional mechanism developed between India and the APEC region. Out of 21 APEC countries, India has already comprehensive FTA treaty in place with 11 of them. India is negotiating FTAs with Australia, Canada and New Zealand, member of RCEP, negotiating bilateral investment treaty with United States of America. India set up a joint study group to support the feasibility of launching comprehensive free trade agreement with Russia. And from the business side also, with most of the major economies in this region, we have business to business, very dynamic CEOs forum, and every year we meet 3 to 4 times to thrash out the business agenda, and that feed into the leader summit. Now, interestingly, what I tried to do that this year, Manila APEC Summit declaration, and I was trying to match it with our own government of India's priorities. I saw a lot of similarities between what APEC is trying to promote and what Indian government priorities are. One, of course, is first, I just randomly picked up some points like in APEC declaration, we saw building inclusive economies, and that good governance, ease of doing business, that again both are the buzzword and the key selling point of the new Prime Minister Modi. Commitment to sustainable development goals and financial inclusion. Those of you are not aware that the Government of India launched a major program on financial inclusion, and that is called Jan Dhan Yojana. Millions of people were given and were helping opening the bank account. Fostering micro, small and medium enterprises participation in regional and global markets. So, as in the previous session we discussed the importance of global value chain, how important it is for us if you want to be a part of any global value chain, we have to take necessary reforms, and that is extremely important. And this Make in India also, because you cannot revive your manufacturing without building and creating a robust value chain. Recognize the importance of SMEs, access to finance as a key enabler of MSME expansion, internationalization and productivity improvement. In fact, this week, on 16th of this month, a major program which Prime Minister himself is launching, that is Startup India, Stand Up India, and that is to help new enterprise SMEs with funding and finance, how they can start their economic investment. Emphasize the opportunity that the internet and digital economy offers to achieve innovative, sustainable, inclusive and secure growth. So there is a big, again, Make in India, Digital India, Skill India, all these programs are being implemented currently in India, and all this I find mentioned in the APEC declaration. To make urbanization work for growth, that is also part of APEC declaration, and we have, this year we have created and launched that we are going to create 100 smart cities. So there is a huge emphasis on urbanization in India also. Invest in human capital development, that also matches with our own Skill India program. To develop the services sector as an enabler of economic growth and inclusion. Services, that's our major aggressive areas of interest in most of the trade negotiations. So we see a lot of synergy between what APEC is trying to promote and what Government of India's priorities are. If you look at India's recent policy reforms, which are very much in sync with APEC priorities, I said that Make in India, if you look at the different components in Make in India, which are the programs which are trying to help realize the objectives of Make in India, Skill India, Digital India, Startup India, Stand Up India, Zero Defect and Zero Effect. And that is very critical also in the previous session. We missed the discussion on this because the standards is very, very critical. If small and medium enterprises have to get integrated to global value chain. And more importantly, all big MNCs of the world, they are following the private standards. And the standard has to be uniform across the entire supply chain. So for small and medium enterprises, if they want to integrate into global value chain, they have to scale up and graduate in the standards. Jan Dhan Yojana, I mentioned that this is program for financial inclusion. The reforms initiated by the government to support this transformation, more openness to foreign investment, and that way we have seen that at least we may be lagging behind on export front, but on the foreign investment front we are doing reasonably well. Recapitalization of PSU banks so that more funds are available for private companies, non-adversarial and investor-friendly tax system, GST is still not approved by the parliament, but we are hoping that this will be operationalized. Easing the regulatory environment for doing business, that's again a major component in the Make in India. In fact, as a result of that, we slightly moved up in the World Bank ease of doing business report. And we have seen that in case of, on the governance front, particularly last year when the middle with option, lot of transparency were practiced, and that is a very forward-looking strategy. Policy reforms impact, as I mentioned that on trade front, of course, we are not going as good, but on investment front, we have been able to generate a lot of investment, foreign direct investment. Similarly, overall growth is also reasonably in 7 to 8%, the range of 7 to 8%. That is also much better than what other countries are doing. I don't want to discuss this because this has already been discussed that potential benefits for India. Many studies have been done, but I said that studies are done on the basis of certain assumptions provided, and more importantly that how better prepared are we to make use of those grouping and those agreements. Now coming to the what are the major concerns? What is the sense of caution? While APEC membership doesn't seem to have any binding obligations, clauses for India, but many areas such as government procurement, investment agreement obligations, and intellectual property rights, and many others might emerge as major issues of debate in coming days. If you look at India-US is at present we do not have any kind of trade agreement, investment agreement with USA, but since TPP or APEC, US is a major player, and on some of the issues we have a divergent stance. For instance, in IPR, USA has a very strict IPR regime in all its free trade agreements and investment agreements. We follow a more development-oriented approach in our IPR system. Similarly, in the services negotiation, US and other countries, other APEC countries like Canada, Mexico, they are following the negative-list approach. We follow the positive-list approach, which is what is called the GATT approach in the WTO. Similarly, for USA, labor environment are must in any free trade agreement. For us, labor is absolute red line for any free trade agreement. So we do not have convergence on some of the very fundamental and key issues in trade agreement. So in the eventuality of our accession to APEC, how these long established negotiating stance could impact. Now, are we really prepared? So whether India would be able to commit resources to the benefit out of the membership of APEC, as it works on a very large number of issues. So from government of India side also we have to see whether we will be able to engage more meaningfully and really take benefit out of this initiative. From industry side, as I mentioned that industry is willing to lend its support provided industry sees the benefit out of it. For instance, Amit in the morning session raised the issue of that India foreign policy is very dynamic, Prime Minister is taking over, but on trade openness, we are not still very conservative. So we have done trade reforms in the last 20 years after the establishment of WTO, but still our industry is slightly more conservative and try to resist the trade openness. And there is a reason behind it. For instance, in FDI, industry is very much supportive of open foreign direct investment regime because we have seen the benefit of open foreign direct investment regime. In fact, contrary to the industry stance on FDI openness, given that there is opposition from the political class in parliament on the opening of foreign direct investment. But on trade issues, since all these FTAs which we have done in the recent past, they have not been able to generate very visible impact, visible benefit for the industry and exporters. The industry is slightly concerned, and in some of these agreements, because in RCEP, China factor is there, China we reduce trade with China. So these are the major fears of industry. That's why industry is not very gung-ho and is not very aggressive in terms of lending its support to any such future trade agreement. Thank you.
Thank you.
think there's a very strange sense of irony I got out of the two presentations, and I think I'll try to converge this too. But I'll start with two specific questions. Joe, the first question to you, I think it was superb in the way you distilled the fact that the whole theme of TPP and the RCEP is drift away from multilateralism, that in a sense has been compromised. And I remember your early work where you said that TPP has produced this sense of optimism that there would be a convergence among regional governments, which eventually it hasn't happened. Because it became a series of bilateral negotiations rather than a set of composite negotiations. But what I'm trying to look at, and it's specifically with respect to the FTA, if we put the TPP here and the RCEP here, and what we are eventually getting to is an agreement on the lowest common denominator, then where would the FTA be? Because if we are taking the lower of the lowest basis from all the existing agreements, then isn't it a futile exercise to essentially think of an FTA other than an entirely strategic construct? I mean, if it's a strategic construct, if it's being defended from a political perspective, then it's fine. But from an economic perspective, what's the rationale that if we are eventually left with? I mean, we talk about low-hanging fruits. This might not even be a fruit in the first place, because we might have actually cultivated and eaten it. So what's the point in putting that much of resource and benefit into it? So that's a thought that I thought I'd share with you and love to have a reaction to. Pranav, I mean, this is where my specific question to you, Pranav, is coming from something that John shared, and John mentioned about this World Bank study, which points to the fact that India may not really lose if it doesn't become a member of the TPP. It might actually gain. But you mentioned in the specific context of export slowdown, the GSP withdrawal has hit Indian exports pretty hard. And the GSP withdrawal is, of course, with respect to certain major TPP member markets. So if that is the case, then India should fight for recovering its preferential access. Right? And then an agreement like TPP, or at least balancing the impact of an agreement like TPP, becomes important. So what's the rationale to that? I mean, do we rush for the TPP? Do we strike bilaterals with the US? Do we finish the agreement with Canada? Do we execute the one with Australia? So, I mean, what's the story getting into? I mean, if it is a question of preferential access and the loss of it, which is bringing down Indian exports substantively by 200 billion, and also this number, how do Indian exports survive? I mean, what's the way out? So I don't know whether I've complicated matters further. I thought that these are very interesting perspectives coming out of the whole story.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed both presentations. To John, I notice your skepticism of CG models. How would you measure the benefits and costs in any other framework that is a number? That's the question to you. And to Pranav, sometimes you hear Indian industry saying, we have no comparative advantage versus China. I wonder if the export slowdown is such a sentiment more pronounced. Is this true? Really like your thoughts. Thank you.
Take these answers and then go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Many thanks, Amitendra. I'm very skeptical about how the FTA could materialize. I mean, generally, I'm a multilateralist. everything that we know tells from economic models tells us that welfare will be maximized by maximizing the area covered by a free trade agreement. So in principle, from an economic point of view, the FTA makes a great deal of sense. Politically, it's a non-starter. A decade or so ago, there was a lively debate between Vinnie and Fred Bergsten on the FTA. For once, I was entirely convinced by Vinnie's argument. Will the US Congress today, any more than a decade ago, agree to a free trade agreement with China? I think the answer is absolutely not. So that makes it very unlikely that one will see an FTA. And as I suggested in the presentation, trying to combine these two agreements, which have very, very different coverage in terms of the depth of the agreements, there's only one way to do it, and that is you'd have to go for the TPP. No one in the TPP is going to say, okay, we'll relax our standards in order to allow others into the agreement. I mean, what we're going to see, and we've already seen this, and Debbie's made this case very effectively, I think. I mean, the Koreans were incredibly stupid not to be in there at the start. And now they want to come in, and they're basically going to get really exploited. Because they're going to have to sign up for everything that everyone else has signed up, plus more. It's like China coming into the WTO in 2001. No one's going to get into a combined agreement unless it's TPP and probably TPP plus. On modeling, yes, I'm very skeptical of CG models, as indeed are many economists now. Well, how would one go about measuring things in another framework? I mean, frankly, I don't know that one can do it in advance, and especially when one doesn't know what the content of the agreement's going to be. And that's even more problematic. So there were these marvelous models done of the Australia-US free trade agreement, which saw all sorts of benefits flowing to the Australian economy, most of which came from increased agricultural exports to the US. Now, inconveniently for models, these would come out of the agreement. So, I mean, to me, the best modeling that's done of agreements is ex post. And ex post, one sees quite different results. And I point you to the work that Shira Armstrong has done recently on the Australia-US free trade agreement, which shows trade diversion and welfare losses for both of the countries.
Yeah, so first question of differential access. I think we have to make distinction between the kind of difference we were getting through GSP and the kind of difference you get in the free trade agreement. Of course, GSP revival is may not be possible because India has moved up on that route. But GSP was unilateral, and in GSP case, you were competing with Bangladesh, Pakistan, and other countries, so you really had advantage. And often I said that in the current scenario of free trade agreements, in all practical purpose, you don't get the preferential market access, you are just at a level playing field. Because, for instance, if India has FTA with ASEAN, China also has FTA with ASEAN, Japan also has FTA with ASEAN, Korea, Australia, all are in the FTA with ASEAN. You are as good as them in terms of market access. So things boil down to your competitiveness. If you are better competitive vis-a-vis your trading partners, then of course you have better chance to access that market. And that is where India is lacking. But it goes without saying that these days, since most of the trade is happening through preferential route, so we have to compensate our GSP loss. One simple example I give you, for instance, in case of EU-India FTA, which still has not gone through, and we have been negotiating since 2007. The best way to compensate our GSP loss in EU market by signing EU free trade agreement. But somehow there are problems from all sides. Industry is also not unanimous because textile sector is sees great benefit, leather sector sees a great benefit, automobile sector is opposing it, wines and spirit sector they are opposing it. Similarly, from EU side also there are 28 to 9 countries, they have their different demands. So hasn't happened. Had it gone through, we would have compensated our GSP loss. But in East Asia also with ASEAN or TPP or RCEP, of course we have to go for preference and market access because by going for preference and market access, you are at level playing field for all your competitors. Now this comes to the second question which Ganesh has raised, competitive advantage vis-a-vis China. And that is a major concern for Indian industry. Three factors which put China far ahead than us. One, infrastructure. We lack infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure China and other East Asian countries have. Second is the cost of capital. Our cost of capital is almost double than what China and other countries face. And third critical factor is the sourcing of inputs. That is also very critical in your manufacturing. And China has a huge, big, fat sovereign fund, and they are using that fund to source raw materials. And give you the example of China-Australia trade figure. China has a trade deficit of $60 billion with Australia. Australia is a mining country, we all know. And China is sourcing raw materials from Australia, and that is making Chinese industry, Chinese manufacturing sector more competitive. So that kind of strategy we don't have. We don't have that kind of fund also where private sector can source and own mines in those countries. In fact, few years back we proposed to the government of India, let's create some kind of sovereign fund which private sector can use to source cheap intermediate products and raw materials.
John, I don't understand why the USTR's website, Made in America, is evidence of a bad agreement for TPP. I mean, I think USTR has Made in America, and New Zealand has why the TPP is good for New Zealand, and Japan has why the TPP benefits Japanese firms, and I'm enthusiastically writing booklets like why TPP benefits supply chain food manufacturers, why it helps food producers, whatever. I mean, I don't think that that means the agreement is good, bad, or ugly. I think you write the agreement materials to suit the audience that you're trying to reach out to. And USTR is not aiming at Singaporeans, it's aiming at skeptical Americans. So I think if I were USTR, I'd be writing a document that says Made in America or Make in America, whatever your argument slogan would be, to make Americans enthusiastic about the TPP. So I don't know that that is the sort of the death knell to the TPP as an agreement. Happily for me, though, I do think that there are strong benefits. We can make this argument probably for the next, I don't know how many years, for quite a long time. And tomorrow I'll make a strong argument that there are really heavy costs for non-participants in the TPP. And there's only heavy costs for non-participants, I think, because there's a consequence to the TPP itself, an economic consequence to the TPP, which is, for me, fabulous news, because it means that whatever company comes to talk to us, I can find some benefits for them from the TPP, whatever sector they happen to be in, whatever they're doing. I think I can find some sort of thing to get benefits from, which is very good news. But that's not true for all FTAs. So that gets to my sort of second point to Mr. Kumar, which is that not all FTAs are the same. So you can have lots of FTAs, but that doesn't mean they're any good at all. I mean, I can sign 1 million of these things, and that, so what? I have lots of FTAs. Unless they're meaningful, commercially meaningful, unless they cover the things that firms actually trade in areas that they actually care about, with provisions that are easy to use, run by officials that actually implement them as intended, they do no good at all. And bilateral agreements are much harder for firms to use than regional agreements. So the fact that India has signed FTAs and doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the desired outcomes. And I think part of the problem that India's got, in my view, is that the past FTAs have not been good. And I point to India-ASEAN as a classic example. That is a horrible agreement. India-ASEAN is by far the worst of all of the 5 ASEAN agreements. The coverage on tariffs is dreadful. The goods coverage, I'll put it, I think it's in my slides for tomorrow, but the coverage on goods is terrible. The coverage on services is worse. The coverage on investments is worse than that. And everything else is left out of the agreement. So if you want to make a regional agreement that's going to have real economic consequences that firms will use, ASEAN India is not the agreement they're going to use. If you want to ask why is it that Singaporean FDI into India is higher, part of it could be, we'd have to check, part of it I think is because Singapore has its own FTA with India that is far better than the agreement that they have with ASEAN and other ASEAN members. So they're not all the same. And because of that, you can't just rely on an FTA to result in the kind of positive outcomes that you want, because the supporting and the enabling environment that these operate in also matters. So it's not just the quality of the FTA, it's not just that it's bilateral, it's also all of the environment. And firm after firm comes in and says, we're having one nightmare after another in India trying to operate. It's killing us, we're not interested, and we sure as hell don't want to set up bigger supply chains or set up or expand our supply chains because we're running into all these other obstacles, even if we had a beautiful FTA in place. So there's a whole lot of other moving parts that go together, I think, before you can say one way or the other whether FTA is making a difference.
I feel a little bit I'm being baited here by Amitendo staring directly across me, baiting me to respond to some of the, well, I just thought as someone as an aside, having been a little bit of the referee on the debate between the infamous Vinny Agarwal and Fred Bergsten, I would just respond a little bit on this achievability and what would the FTAP actually be. I think the outcome of that study was that yes, the political economy is bad, it is unlikely to get there any time in the future, but that doesn't mean you should give up on the vision of an integrated Asia-Pacific region, and that we will do so by taking gradual steps towards that end. And that's probably the only feasible outcome of any study. Now, some of those steps have been taken, and we could well argue that the TPP is one of those steps, and RCEP is one of those steps, and so on and so forth. And there are other things that have gone on since, when was that, 2006? Since in that bill towards that end. I think one of the questions that we put forward as PEG, though, is what do you actually mean by an FTAP? It's a very undefined concept, and the idea that Fred was harping about was something actually much closer to what had been the free trade area of the Americas negotiations. And I don't think that's something we had in mind. It was a much more different concept. It was perhaps closer to some of the original ideas behind what the Asia-Pacific integration should really be about. Pranav, on the export slowdown, it's not like, I guess you see it from an Indian perspective, but it's one of the things that we think about really quite a lot in APEC. This whole peak trade thing is affecting everyone. It's not perhaps unique, it's not unique to India's circumstances, but it's perhaps unique to the period in the global economy that we're at, and the implications of what has happened post-GFC to the structure of different economies. Tremendous structural change in China, huge structural change in the US, continued anemic growth in Europe. Those are three very important things that we see on the table. And so the question is, what is the trade policy or economic policy response to that? And I think we would pretty much argue that we actually really need to open up. And it's very, I think I would argue that it's very hard to prejudge which sectors are going to be competitive. We don't know. So it's, you know, which tariff lines do you want to carve out that suit your competitiveness? That might work this year, but it might not work next year. So in effect, unless you have an open regime, you're almost damning yourself to an inability to effectively engage in those GVCs and then move up the value chain, even if you are in the GVC. So my real question around is there a constituency for this? Because you ended, I think, on what I thought was a somewhat of a pessimistic note, but does Indian industry see opportunity in being part of the Asia Pacific community? And then what would they like to see? What do they actually want out of the process? I think that's something that at least someone in my position needs to hear. What do you want out of it? That's kind of the bottom line.
I just wanted to ask this question of the TPP, that in all these calculations that have been done about the benefits of TPP, has there been any consideration been made of the adjustments that have been made on the behind the border issues? Because the entire game in the TPP has moved away from border to behind the border. And there are a huge amount of regulatory, adjustments that have to be made to the regulatory structure, and the costs that have to be borne by this. And I don't think, any of the studies that I have looked at, and here I have an issue with the CGE studies, because none of these actually factor in the regulatory costs. And I was just wondering, I just looked at, John was talked about the labor and environment. I just looked at the labor chapter, and I just wonder how these three economies in the ASEAN region, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam in particular, how they are going to be implementing that side agreement that the US has done on labor. Vietnam will have to change its political system if they have to implement the labor standards. To give that kind of a freedom to workers to do all these unions, they have to get rid of the socialist system. Nothing short of that. In fact, I was speaking in an ILO conference with the trade unions from the Asia Pacific region on the TPP. I don't see short of that. So, is TPP really a trade liberalization exercise, or is it creating more barriers? The other issue that I want to raise is on agriculture. The single biggest roadblock in the WTO has been the agricultural subsidies in the US. US has gone off the table in the WTO precisely because there was this targeting of their subsidies. US subsidies is off the table in TPP. So I just wonder that are markets getting more, sort of contestable, or they are getting more, dirtier by doing all this. And the final point, as I'm speaking, John is peering over this particular slide on Made in America, TPP. There's a political context to that. Obama administration could not have negotiated TPP if they had not gone and told the Congress that you don't have to do anything about the rules. Laws will remain the same because it's the US rules which are going to be implemented everywhere. None of the others in the TPP membership, I have looked at the websites, who go and say TPP is made in New Zealand or they made in Canada. It's the US TR which says made in America. And I think it's a very significant political message that we're giving. It's not about gains and losses. We're cutting out all the rhetoric about jobs and workers and agricultural thing and stuff like that. This is a solid political message that we do not have the TPA, but we can do a deal because it is made in America, and we are just going to be not changing any of the rules.
I think we will take this into a kind of a discussion rather than
Sanjana from Axis. Three short questions for Mr. Pranab Kumar. It's related to what Devi said as part of what Ed was saying. Can you tell me, in your perspective, which FTA that India has signed is perfect? Like I heard you said, FTAs are not getting the right benefits for the industry. In the morning, Ambassador was also saying that India is not ready to sign on an agreement where they don't see the benefits. So can you point me to an FTA that's benefit for Indian industries, or for something that Singapore has signed or any other country? That's first question. Second, how far Indian industries are involved in the discussion or negotiation of trade agreement? I'm asking this question because if you ask any industry players, are you ready to undertake this domestic reform or industry reform and sign this FTA, they will say no, they are never ready. So you need to come under a middle ground where you have to listen to the government and you have to listen to the industry also. So basically there will also be a negotiation between the government and the domestic industries. Otherwise industries are never ready. So I would like to have your view on that. And third, you mentioned
that China is more competitive because of ABC. And you said that India will go ahead with a sovereign fund to invest in those kind of, but there can be other ways. Like China has a strategic way of thinking, they have a big vision. Sorry, I missed Dr. Ganesh's presentation earlier. Like how the Indian industry can be part of the GBC or the regional network, at least for some of the industries, so they can again boost up the exports. So these are my 3 questions. Thank you.
And then we get a set of answers.
I think this is working. So, my name has been invoked a few times, so I thought I might say something in that context and also sort of pose a question and try to do some reconciliation of different perspectives, which people may not agree with. But first, I just want to say I'm not against the FTAB, as I might have suggested. I said that it's not politically feasible at this point, which is very different than saying I'm against it. But that got me thinking about the basic way that economists look at the world, and political economists like myself and John Ravel look at the world, and probably Debbie Helms. And I think this is what it is. For an economist, take one CG model, stir in some good political will, and you have an agreement. Okay? But the problem with that model is that political will is a completely vacuous concept. And every article that ends with, all we need is political will, shows essentially that you have no idea what the hell is going on, so why don't we just throw in some political will, because our model doesn't get you to the outcome we have, because we've omitted the most important variable in getting to the outcome. The way political scientists, and I'm not saying it's superior, it's just different, look at the negotiation of these FTAFs or large type agreements of whatever they might be, is you look at political coalitions, economic coalitions. They may not care very much about aggregate CGE modeling gains, because after all, political coalitions, I don't care if I'm the auto sector, what do I care about agriculture in the United States? I'm self-centered in these complete sense. You have political coalitions, sometimes ethnic, as in the United States, you have Indian political coalitions and so on. And then, so we don't have a completely bottom-up model, we have a strategic consideration of the US government. You know, we think about the executive, what are their interests at a geopolitical level. You add those together and you get an agreement. So the fundamental problem I see here is that people are talking past each other. I'm not saying CG models are not important, because they in fact may underlie some of the interests of political coalitions and economic coalitions. But to think that somehow you do a model and you say all we need is political will, that kind of misses the whole point of the negotiation process of these agreements. And I'll talk about this more tomorrow. I think one needs to look at the political coalitions in India, the fact that Modi's political coalition is actually my subcaste members, which are Banyas and traders, and they don't want trade liberalization because it's going to hurt them a lot. So I think those are some of the issues we might want to think about.
Wonderful. What I'm going to do is to say anybody can answer, but first option to the speakers, and then everybody can. And altogether 10 minutes.
Okay, well, let me try to be brief. If the USTR website is the worst problem with the TPP, then I would be very relaxed about the agreement. I mean, for me, it's an illustration of this issue of how do you go about bringing regulatory coherence. And of course, there are 2 principal ways through which you can do this. One is through mutual recognition, which has always been the EU's approach to this, and the other is harmonization, which has always been the US preference. And what one saw in the TPP negotiations was an insistence on harmonization around US rules. Even where, for instance, in dealing with pirated internet copy, other countries had perfectly good mechanisms, rules of their own. And so, you know, some of the conflict in the negotiations came about because of this attempt by the United States to insist that its rules would be the ones that apply. And of course, if you go down the path of harmonization, then there are distributional consequences which are quite different from mutual recognition. And if it's the US rules that are going to win out, then it's likely that the bulk of the benefits are going to go to US-based interests. On labour and the environment, I think that they're largely irrelevant chapters in the TPP. There are token gestures towards concerns that civil society groups have, but there's nothing enforceable in there.
The side activities are.
Well,
before they enter.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see, but I mean, it's always very difficult for the US on labour issues when it hasn't signed up to many of the ILO treaties itself. Finally, I think the TPP generally is oversold. I mean, it's possible that one can identify benefits to individual firms, but a lot of the overselling is done basically on economic illiteracy of the general public. So, you have these wonderful claims. The TPP is going to generate X billion dollars worth of benefits. For the person in the street, that sounds huge. But they don't realize what the overall size of, say, the US economy is, and how those billions of dollars of benefits are only a tiny fraction of overall US GDP. Or, and I was following this quite closely in Canada, looking at how some of the local press was covering this. In Nova Scotia, it was lobster farmers get huge benefits from TPP. Vietnam's tariffs, massive tariffs of 5%, will be abolished. Well, this in a country whose currency has depreciated by 25% against the US dollar in the last 12 months, rather more significant than 5% tariff. So, a lot of this comes back to selling an agreement, and obviously agencies have an interest in doing this, in a way that makes it sound like it's much more important than it really is. I come back to a comment that Paul Krugman made probably 20 years ago. He said, there's a dirty little secret about trade agreements. They really aren't very important when it comes to overall national welfare. And that applies even more so, I think, to these preferential agreements.
Yes, quickly. So, on your question of which transparency in India to the industry, I can speak on behalf of industry. Since Indian industry is very diversified, so if you expect that the unified common voice in support or against will come for any particular agreement, that is not going to happen. For instance, in case of EU-India FTA, textile, leather, all labor-intensive sector which were enjoying GST preference, they are quite aggressive and demanding that this agreement should go through very soon. But there are other sectors like mines and spirits, automobile, I said that they are against it. On your question of which FTA good, I think the answer cannot be very black and white. As I said that in any free trade agreements, you gain and you lose. You make some commitment, you get, and you get some commitment from your partners. You have to make it happen. I can cite the example of India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement that was signed in 1999. Initially, it was a sort of unilateral agreement. India front-loaded a lot of concessions to Sri Lanka and Cuba. But Sri Lanka soon realized that we don't have that kind of manufacturing capability to export to India. So Sri Lanka opened up its market for Indian investment. So Indian investment went there, manufactured, and started making benefit of the free access the India has provided to Sri Lanka. Second, again, important thing which Sri Lanka did, the Sri Lanka allowed visa on arrival to Indians. And that given a big boost to Sri Lankan tourism. So, all depends upon how you take more enabling decisions, which will make it facilitate the use of FTAs. And that has not been done in case of India. And second important thing in case of India, our sequencing was not right. Because in case of East Asia particularly, you are competing with all the manufacturing giants. It is China, Korea, Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. They are far, far ahead than us. Our manufacturing has been stagnant. So without paying much attention to our manufacturing sector, We signed the agreement, and after signing the agreement, then we got our new manufacturing policy, and now this Make in India. And before that, we were harping on that we are now global power in services. So that kind of sequencing could have been right, that we could have really paid good attention to our manufacturing sector at least a decade back. So we are almost a decade behind. Industry industry involvement again is not very structured. So we are involved, we are engaged, consulted, and now it has again increased. And we have seen in case of RCEP particularly. Earlier, what was happening that Government of India, Ministry of Commerce used to come after negotiating the agreement. When the negotiations are about to be signed and the agreement are about to be concluded. But in RCEP, basically, they have, during the course of the negotiations, they have gone and consulted industry members in all the public sessions. So slowly we are graduating to a more intense and more structured consultation with industry. So that is really helpful. But of course, if you want to get meaningful feedback from industry, you have to prepare industry also. If industry is not well informed, then of course industry will not give you very meaningful. And that is what is happening in case of India. The moment the consultation is started, then industry is very resistant. That the government is coming to us to ask for something that this sector will be open, this sector will be open, this sector will be open. So you have to, for instance, when I started working with Indian industry, at that time they were dead against FTA. Though by that time we signed FTA with ASEAN, Japan, Korea and all of us right. But even though they were opposing that we should withdraw out of it, then I worked hard to make them understand, look, this is given. You cannot go back. FTAs are given. Now we have to think how you can make use of it. If you are facing any problem, then government is trying to understand. But if government is asking for A, you are trying to engage with government on B issue, that is not going to help. No way India can get out of these FTAs. These FTAs are going to stay. There is a global trend. India has taken a decision. So we have to take it given and now think, read the agreement and see where you are not understanding, where you are lacking, what support you need from the government. So we have reached to that stage. Now, the industry is convinced that we have to live with FTA, we have to live with RCEP. Now, PPP also they are trying to decipher. So this transformation is going on. We are still in the transition phase, but of course in another 5-10 years time period, that industry will be more proactive and more engaged in all these negotiations. Thank you.
I think there's no time. But there's a tea break and there's all tomorrow as well. So thank you for a wonderful interaction. Thank you, speakers.
Sure. Of course, just a small mention on something in the program. You'll notice that we are ending with a round table tomorrow on India and India. And of course, we have 3 lead speakers over there, out of which 2 lead speakers I didn't actually alert them, saying that they are going to be drawn and research. Now that their names are present over there, they can't escape. And Vinny, of course, was aware of it. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that though we have 3 lead speakers, it's expected to be a roundtable about all speakers. So I know that you have your respective commitments, but I would request you if all of the speakers could be around at the roundtable tomorrow, it would be fantastic. That would be a perfect icing on the cake as we end off. Thank you, Ed. Now for tea. Thank you so much. We come back at 3:30. Oh, yeah. John, you look correct.